Hello, welcome to Intro into Cardiology, Part 3, which is titled, Let's Get Ventricular. Spoilers, we are talking about ventricular rhythms. So in the previous videos, we talked about the anatomy and physiology of the heart. We talked about the electrical conduction system. We've talked about sinus rhythms, atrial rhythms. We've talked about junctional rhythms. Let's get into ventricular rhythms. So to review, before we get into that, I want to talk about that electrical conduction system one more time. So over here we have our SA node, our sinoatrial node, that is going to beat innately at 60 to 100 beats per minute. Then moving on down the line here, we have our atrioventricular node, AV node, that is between the atria and the ventricles. And the innate firing rate for that is 40 to 60 beats per minute. And then moving down, descending, we have down our bundle branch blocks, or down our bundle branches and our Purkinje fibers, and those are going to innately fire at 20 to 40 beats per minute. We're going to review some basic stuff here. We got our P wave, we have our Q, R, S, and our T. P is going to be the depolarization of the atria, Q or S, depolarization of the ventricles, and T is going to be repolarization of the ventricles. Before we descend into ventricular rhythms here, I want to lay the foundation of narrow versus wide QRS. A normal QRS is going to be less than or equal to 0.12 seconds in length, so it's going to be 3 small boxes from beginning of QRS to end of QRS, and that is going to be considered narrow. What that means is that that is going to be a stimulus that originated right up here, and it's going to come down, and these ventricles are going to become depolarized, but that started up here. When it is wide, on the other hand, so when it is greater than 0.12 seconds, it is wide. That signifies that that stimulus came from down here. It came from somewhere in the ventricles, whether it be the Purkinje fibers, your bundle branches, or just a rogue pacemaker cell out in the ventricular space. Remember, cardiac muscle tissue has pacemaker cells in them, so each of them are capable of producing their own electrical stimulus. And left to their own devices, if no one else is creating that stimulus, they will do that on their own. So we have narrow, that's going to be less than or equal to 3 boxes. And then we have wide, which is greater than 3 boxes. Wide QRS waves signify ventricular instability or a stimulus originating from the ventricles, not the SA node, which we did just talk about. So let's get into our first one, which is actually not a rhythm in itself. It is our PVCs, our premature ventricular contraction. This is what's referred to as an ectopic beat. So it is originating in the ventricles, but it is amidst an underlying rhythm. So this beat is going to be wide, and that's how we're going to be able to distinguish it. So we have here, we have a sinus rhythm. So we have a nice P wave, QRS, a narrow QRS, a T wave, P, QRS, T, and then we have this wide, big QRS. See how much more wide this is than this? That is considered wide, and we know that because it is wide, it is originating somewhere in the ventricles, and it is amidst an underlying rhythm. PVC can offset the underlying rhythm, making it appear irregular, just so you are aware. It might throw off that cadence, and so the underlying rhythm becomes kind of reset or lost in that large QRS complex, making it appear irregular. So something to keep in mind. Two PVCs in a row are called a couplet. 3 is going to be called a run of VTach. So I have a couplet here, and then I have 1, 2, 3. That is what's called a run of VTach. And then we have bigeminy. So what I'm describing is just different patterns of PVCs, okay? Bigeminy is going to be when they are every other beat. So I have PVC, sinus beat, PVC, sinus beat, PVC. You can take that same concept, extrapolate it, trigeminy. It's going to be every third beat. PVC, sinus, sinus, PVC, sinus. In short, let's review. We got PVCs are going to be wide ectopic beats. Ectopic just means that it is originating outside the underlying rhythm. It's going to be a rogue beat doing its own thing. So it's an ectopic beat that is wide amidst an underlying rhythm. And again, we have couplets. We have runs of VTach, which is going to be 3 in a row. Bigeminy, trigeminy. You could even do quadgeminy if you really wanted to. That's just describing the pattern. So now that we've talked about PVCs, let's talk about ventricular tachycardia. We actually kind of already almost had a little segue into it here when we talked about our run of VTach, which is when, let me get my laser pointer, which is when we have 3 PVCs in a row. And essentially what's happening is because it is so continuous, they just call that a small burst of VTach. If you were to take that and extrapolate it and just keep going, that's all VTach is. It's a rhythm made up entirely of ventricular beats, and it is above 100 beats per minute. So it's going to be tachycardic, above 100, then it's going to be wide, meaning it's greater than 0.12 seconds and 3 boxes in width. So from the time I have here to here, that is going to be greater than 3 boxes. Now, when I say 3 boxes, I mean in your cardiac ECG paper, not these little dots. That's not what we're talking about here. I'm talking about your ECG reading paper on your life pack or whatever your monitor style is. So we have a rhythm made up entirely of ventricular beats. It's above 100, and it is consistently wide. And so an example of this would be right here. This is ventricular tachycardia. This is what is referred to as monomorphic VTach, meaning it is of the same origin. So these beats are originating in the same place or the same places, and so the complex has the same or similar morphology, monomorphic. When we take that and change it into polymorphic, we have different origin sites of electrical stimulus in the ventricles. So you could have some pacemaker cells creating stimuluses. You could have some originating from the Purkinje fibers, some from the bundle branches. It really just depends. But because of that, because you have these different sources, you have different morphology, and that's reflected. So it's called polymorphic VTach. A specific form of polymorphic VTach is called torsades. What that means in French is going to be twisting of the points, and it almost looks like if you were to take this monomorphic VTach here, and if you were to take a grip on it here and a grip on it here and twist it, you would have this appearance here. That's why they call it that, or at least that's the impression I'm under. And what these individuals are going to end up needing, this is different than most polymorphic VTach. These individuals need MAG. So now that we've talked about ventricular tachycardia, let's talk about ventricular fibrillation. VFib is entirely made up of what's referred to as fib waves, which are going to be little fluttering quiver-like waves. What's happening during ventricular fibrillation is the ventricles are not contracting, they're just quivering. And so a fib is reflecting that. Think fine chaotic wavy lines. There's no discernible QRS, so there's not going to be a QRS wave. It's not going to be necessarily wide or narrow. It's just chaotic, fine, wavy lines. There's no P, there's no T waves. And again, this is quivering, it's not pumping. And so I have some examples of what that might look like down here. This is a fairly easy rhythm to identify, in my opinion. It's squiggly lines. Squiggly lines, fine squiggly lines, and it could look like this, it could look like that, it could look many different ways. You could have what's referred to as, we'll come over here, fine VFib, or you could have coarse VFib. Fine meaning smaller, finer lines, coarse meaning choppier, larger lines. There is zero pattern, and so that means it is irregularly irregular. Let's move down to idioventricular rhythms. Idioventricular rhythms are, think VTach slowed down. So the higher pacemaker sites are failing at depolarizing the heart, so the ventricles are going to do the job for them. What this is going to look like is these down here. We have a slower, wide, QRS-dominated rhythm. There's no P waves, there's no T waves, and again, that QRS is going to be wide, so it's going to be greater than 3 boxes. Getting into the weeds of discerning what the different patterns are going to be called. So each of these things are all ventricular rhythms. So if the rate is 20 to 40, you can just call that idioventricular. If it's 40 to 100, that would be technically accelerated ventricular rhythm. And then greater than 100, VTach. All in all, though, we're kind of splitting hairs here. They're all ventricular in nature, which is the most important thing to acknowledge and recognize. Everybody, that's Let's Get Ventricular. If you guys have questions, comments, concerns, please hit me up. I love talking about this stuff, and look forward to the next one.